She didn't love you. She benefited from you, and the difference was your destruction. You weren't chosen, you were convenient, a solution to her boredom, a structure for her chaos, not a soul to be cherished, but a service to be consumed. Schopenhauer warned men 2 centuries ago, love is not what you think it is. It's not magic, it's not divine, it's a mask worn by survival, seductive, persuasive, and blind. And you, like most men, worshipped the mask until it demanded your identity as payment. This is not just about women. It's about how a man forgets himself while trying to become what she needed. You didn't fall in love, you fell into function. And the tragedy is, you kept calling it devotion. But this time, you're not here to collapse. You're here to confront the illusion, to ask the question most men avoid. What if she never loved me? Just the role I played. He thought it was fate. She saw him as a placeholder. And now he sits in the ruins of a love story that only felt real to him. Schopenhauer said it best. What we call love is often the will to survive wearing perfume. And Jung, he saw the collapse coming long before the heartbreak. He doesn't cry for her. He cries for the mask he wore to deserve her. He cries for the boy who thought being useful meant being loved. And when that usefulness expired, so did the illusion. She didn't leave him. She returned him to himself, broken, unchosen, and awake. He learned early that truth had a cost. When he cried, they told him to be strong. When he laughed too loud, they asked him to be quiet. Every expression had a condition, every emotion a warning. Love came with rules, presence came with performance. He became a well-trained puppet in the theater of survival. A boy who mastered smiles, earned praise, and swallowed grief. His joy was choreographed, his anger exiled. No one saw the fracture begin, the split between who he was and who they accepted. The reward, temporary affection. The price, identity erosion. Now he's a man who only feels valuable when he's useful. He says yes when he means no. He shows up even when he's breaking, not out of kindness but because disappearing terrifies him more than being drained. He's never known love without sacrifice, never known peace without pretending. The world applauds his loyalty, but inside, he's vanishing. Adult relationships become reenactments. He finds partners who echo the conditions of childhood. Love me, but only if you're strong. Be present, but only if you're pleasing. It's not conscious. It's a contract his nervous system still honors. Deep down, he doesn't know who he is without proving it. If he stops performing, will anyone stay? If he shows his exhaustion, will anyone care? The silence around these questions grows louder with each betrayal. And still he smiles, because that's what he was taught survival looks like. He's not lost, he's hidden, buried under years of adaptive obedience and emotional self-betrayal. He's not emotionless, he's flooded with unshed grief. Grief for the boy who had to trade authenticity for attachment. Grief for the man who never learned how to be loved without earning it. He mistook obedience for belonging, confused suppression with maturity. He believed quiet was safe and expression was danger. But now that old equation is killing him, because safety built on silence is just a prettier name for exile. So he begins to ask, what if I don't owe anyone a version of me that fits their comfort? What if love isn't performance, but presence, especially in the dark? The boy who disappeared is still inside, and he's no longer asking for applause. He's asking to come home. He thought offering his depth would earn devotion. He showed her his ruins, hoping she'd understand the architecture of pain. But she wasn't there for the architecture, just the electricity. She wanted warmth, not fire, presence, not power, and above all, she wanted him quiet. At first, she listened, not to learn him, but to map him. Every scar became a tool, every confession a future weapon. What he mistook for intimacy was actually extraction. She studied his wounds not to heal them, but to harvest them. And when he had nothing left to give, She disappeared. He wasn't loved, he was mined. Mined for attention, protection, resources, reassurance. She drained him and called it connection. And he let it happen because he thought being needed meant being cherished. But being needed is not the same as being wanted. He thought he was building a future. She thought he was building her escape route. He gave her his thoughts, his time, his tenderness. She gave him moments, just enough to keep him hoping. But love shouldn't feel like gambling with your sanity. He keeps saying she changed. No, she fulfilled the role he unconsciously assigned her. He chose her not because she was safe, but because she felt familiar. And familiarity, for wounded men, often means tolerating neglect in the name of love. He wasn't betrayed by her. He was betrayed by his blueprint. Somewhere inside, he still believes, if I bleed enough, someone will finally stay. But that belief is the echo of a childhood where silence was survival, where being visible meant punishment, and being invisible meant protection. So he became a ghost with manners, always smiling, always collapsing. And now, he doesn't know how to love without disappearing, doesn't know how to be in a relationship without leaking himself dry. Because he's never asked the real question, who would stay if I stopped performing? Who would love me if I stopped sacrificing? She didn't want his soul, she wanted his silence, and he gave it freely, thinking it was affection. But love doesn't fear your voice. It fears the version of you that forgets you have one. He turned his strength into service. Every boundary became an offering, every moment of pain, a performance for praise. Not because he's weak, but because somewhere, someone taught him, you must earn your place or be erased. He thought devotion was measured by what he could endure. So he endured everything, chaos, coldness, control. Each sacrifice was a silent invoice he never sent, because deep down, he didn't want repayment, he wanted recognition. And when it never came, the debt grew heavier. Love became an economy. He gave loyalty like currency, hoping it would buy him peace. But peace was never on the menu, only dependency. He didn't show up because he was seen. He showed up because being needed made him feel less disposable. He keeps calling it love, but it's labor. Unpaid, unrecognized, unreciprocated. He's not a partner. He's a project manager of her emotions. And when he asks for anything back, it's labeled too much. Because a man who gives endlessly is expected to need nothing. The truth? He doesn't know how to exist without being consumed. He thinks being loved means being emptied. He wears resilience like armor, but inside, exhaustion is the only thing growing. He's not holding a woman. He's holding up a collapsing system, and it's crushing him in silence. He doesn't ask, does she see me? He asks, does she still need me? Because without usefulness, he fears becoming invisible. But being seen only when you're suffering is not love. It's servitude. And masculinity is not a service you owe anyone. He was never taught to ask for rest, only to offer more. Even his moments of pleasure feel earned, not allowed. And his pain, monetized into gestures that look strong but bleed quietly. He's praised for surviving, but never invited to stop. So he begins to ask, what if I stopped buying love with sacrifice? What if my presence wasn't something to prove, but to protect? Masculinity isn't a price tag, and maybe it's time he stopped selling himself just to be seen. He thought the more he bled, the deeper the bond. Every sleepless night, every swallowed word, every "I'm fine," a silent offering. He believed pain was a language of intimacy, that suffering would one day unlock her softness, but all it did was teach her to expect more. She didn't stay because of his depth, she stayed because he made her life easier. His chaos was invisible as long as her comfort remained untouched, and when his needs started surfacing, so did her absence. Because what he called connection, she called convenience. He thought love meant sacrifice, so he gave until he disappeared. But no one notices when a man disappears quietly, not if he still shows up to fix, provide, protect. He kept bleeding, hoping the loss would finally mean something. What he called devotion was really desperation, a hunger to be chosen, to be kept. And in that hunger, he allowed imbalances that fractured his soul. Because if love meant losing himself, then maybe losing himself was the price of love. He never realized that love built on depletion isn't devotion. It's a slow death. He doesn't talk about how tired he is, because no one asked, because he's scared that if he stops being strong, he'll be left alone. But being needed isn't the same as being loved, and pain isn't intimacy. It's proof the scale is broken. He didn't want her to save him. He just wanted someone to stay, to witness the wreckage and not run, to say, "I see you breaking and I'm not leaving." But no one ever did, not really. She didn't betray him. She just stopped pretending it was mutual. He sees it now. The imbalance wasn't new. He just finally ran out of himself to give, and without sacrifice, the illusion collapsed. So he begins to wonder, what if I've confused suffering with sincerity? What if being seen doesn't require bleeding for it? Maybe love isn't about proving your worth. Maybe it's about seeing who still stands beside you when you stop performing pain. There's a silence inside him, but it's not peace. It's a pressure, a war, a scream that learned how to smile. He was taught to be calm, to be kind, to be patient. But no one asked if that patience was really resignation. No one saw the buried rage, only the results of his restraint. He walks through life like a soldier without orders, not because he's lost, but because no one ever asked how much it cost to stay composed. When he was angry, they called him dangerous. When he was hurt, they called him weak. So he learned to speak with silence and die by it too. This rage, it doesn't explode. It simmers in his jaw, his gut, his back, his sleep. Not the rage of a villain, but of a man unseen, of a man who gave everything and got maintenance smiles in return. Of the man who kept showing up and was never asked why he was fading. He doesn't yell, he detaches. He doesn't punch walls. He withdraws from life. He's not violent, but he's rotting inside. And that rot isn't toxic. It's grief with no funeral, pain with no witness, truth with no permission. The world calls him loyal, but loyalty without recognition turns to self-erasure. He stayed. He held it all. But deep down, something inside him whispers, no one would have stayed for you. That's the fracture. That's the seed of resentment no one dares to name. He isn't mad at her, not entirely. He's mad at the part of himself that agreed to be used just to be kept. And that grief, it doesn't fade. It hardens. He doesn't want revenge. He wants someone to say, you were more than what you gave. He wants to be wanted even when he's not rescuing someone from their chaos. He wants the kind of love that doesn't require a performance. But he doesn't even know what that would feel like. So he begins to ask, what if my rage isn't the enemy, but the alarm I've been ignoring? What if silence isn't strength, but self-abandonment in disguise? He's not too angry. He's too loyal to his own erasure. And maybe the real rebellion is learning to scream without apology. He keeps finding women who only stay if he's bleeding. If he's struggling, serving, suffering, they applaud. But the moment he's still, centered, or needs space, they pull away. It's not love he's addicted to. It's the ritual of becoming just wounded enough to be tolerated. He doesn't see the pattern at first, because chaos feels familiar, because somewhere deep inside, he equated attention with affection, even if it came with conditions. His value has always been measured by his ability to endure, so he keeps offering himself to the fire, hoping someone calls it devotion. But what he really fears is being well and still alone, being calm and still invisible, because he's never seen a version of himself that is both whole and loved. So he sabotages peace. He mistrusts silence and calls it passion when it's really a cycle. He's not chasing her, he's chasing a role, the one that keeps him needed, even if it costs him himself. He doesn't know how to be loved without bleeding. So he creates just enough dysfunction to be necessary, then wonders why he feels caged. He doesn't want chaos, but he's conditioned to serve it, because calmness was never applauded, presence was never enough. Only pain made people notice, and now he wonders if being visible without pain is even possible. She didn't stay because he was real. She stayed because he was useful, and he confused being tolerated with being chosen. So he danced for survival and called the applause love. Addiction doesn't always come in a bottle. Sometimes it comes in the form of overgiving, in becoming the fixer, the forgiver, the fool. And when that role is all he knows, he can't imagine love that doesn't require a collapse. He doesn't crave her. He craves the brief relief of feeling essential. So he starts to ask, what if love doesn't have to be earned through exhaustion? What if presence isn't a reward for suffering, but a birthright? He's not too broken to be loved. He's just been taught that only brokenness gets attention. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. He told himself, maybe next time. Next gift, next gesture, next forgiveness. She'll see how much I've stayed, how much I've bent, but deep down, he knows, love that must be earned is already lost. He wasn't giving, he was bargaining. He mistook endurance for evidence. If he kept proving his worth, she'd wake up and finally see him. But she wasn't asleep. She saw exactly what he gave and learned she didn't need to give anything back. The more he gave, the more invisible he became. He thought sacrifice was sacred. But no one worships a man they can drain without consequence. She didn't love his soul. She loved the silence he wrapped it in, and every time he stayed, he taught her that his boundaries were negotiable. She didn't change. He just kept moving the line. He wasn't being generous. He was trying to buy permanence with pain, to prove that if he gave more than any man before him, she'd have to stay. But loyalty offered under emotional duress isn't love. It's emotional blackmail, directed at yourself. He told himself it was noble, that good men give without keeping score, but even saints die if they forget to eat. And his soul was starving for something real while he kept serving illusions. He wasn't loved for who he was, just for what he refused to withhold. He never felt irreplaceable, so he gave in excess, hoping to build what no one ever gave him: security, certainty, significance. But you can't make someone value what they didn't ask for, and no amount of overfunctioning fixes emotional disinterest. She didn't choose him. She tolerated his usefulness. And the tragedy is, he knew. But admitting it would mean he had to stop. And stopping meant facing the echo, you are not enough. So he begins to ask, what if the problem isn't her indifference, but my compulsion to be needed? What if generosity without self-worth is just self-erasure in disguise? He wasn't ignored. He was only seen through the lens of what he provided, never who he is. He doesn't know who he is when he's not helping, not fixing, not rescuing, not being thanked. Without the function, he feels like a ghost in his own life, as if presence must be justified to exist, as if love was never unconditional, just undisclosed performance criteria. Every relationship became a job description. Show up, be strong, be silent, be available, not for himself, but for their needs. And when the need stopped, so did the attention. He didn't lose people. He lost his purpose for being tolerated. He doesn't remember the last time someone asked how he was without needing something. Not what he could give, not how he could help, just him. And in that absence, he became a stranger to his own soul. He started asking, do I exist beyond utility? Usefulness is a seductive prison. It gives the illusion of belonging, until you stop serving, and the silence answers what love never said aloud. He wasn't valued. He was hired under emotional contract, then discarded without notice. The death of the role feels like the death of the man, because no one taught him how to be when he's not producing. And that's the tragedy. He confused love with labor, and labor, when unpaid, becomes exploitation. even when wrapped in intimacy. He didn't collapse because she left. He collapsed because the identity he built to be loved had no center. He was all outer gesture, inner void. And when the applause stopped, so did the illusion that he mattered. He was never the man, just the function attached to him. Now he stares at the rubble of what he built, of who he pretended to be, and he whispers the question he never dared ask before. Who would remain if I stopped performing? He was never useless. He was just never seen without his usefulness. And that blindness, from others and from himself, was the real betrayal. So he begins to rebuild, not for applause, not for affection, but for the first time, for himself. He sits alone, not as a punishment, but as a return. No one is asking for anything, no one is clapping, and for the first time he hears the silence, not as a void, but as a voice, the one that was buried under performance, the one that never needed to be impressive, only real. Carl Jung would say, this is where the unconscious emerges, not when you're admired, but when you're stripped, when all the masks fall and you meet what's underneath, not your role, not your function, but your soul, unfiltered, unfinished, untouched by demand. Nietzsche would call it the revolt, not against others, but against the identity you were seduced into serving. The quiet rebellion that says, I am not your healer. I am not your resource. I am not your proof. I am, even when I'm not being used. This is not about becoming selfish. It's about becoming sovereign, about refusing to trade your breath for applause, about saying no, not to her, but to the version of you that was never allowed to be. You don't need a new role. You need a resurrection. Every past betrayal, not of love, but of self, led you here. Every silence you swallowed, every need you buried, every time you let someone stay just because they needed you, not because they saw you. And now, finally, the mirror shatters. Not because you broke, but because the illusion did. You were never meant to be a function, not a therapist in a relationship, not a savior in disguise. You are not a tool. You are not a stagehand in someone else's performance. You are a question the world was too afraid to answer, and now it's time to answer yourself. No more begging to be needed. No more earning your place in rooms you didn't ask to enter. The real self isn't loud, but it is relentless. And once you meet it, you stop performing, because for the first time, you start living. You've been needed, used, praised for surviving things no one even noticed were killing you. But now you know, that wasn't love. That was labor dressed as loyalty. So here's the question. If you stopped being useful, who would stay? If you stopped performing, who would still see you? You don't have to answer right now. But your future depends on whether you ever do, because this isn't just about relationships, it's about identity. You've spent your life being functional, polite, strong, but strength without recognition becomes silent suicide. So now you choose. Keep begging for scraps of affection, or rebuild the self they tried to rent, shape, and discard. Remember, she didn't reject you. She revealed where you were already abandoning yourself, and maybe everything you were chasing in her was just the part of you you left behind to be accepted. Subscribe to this channel, turn on notifications, and continue this brutal journey of self-knowledge and emotional resurrection. Before you go, you've seen what happens when a man mistakes usefulness for love. But what if the entire story of romance was built on a lie? In the next video, we uncover the truth Schopenhauer tried to scream into history about female nature, male blindness, and the cost of refusing to see.